Hey guys, hey, thanks for joining today. Hey, today I wanted to kind of talk about, the psychology and the mentality behind what causes men to become emotionally unavailable. Ambivalence is another common term for this. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Straight to the causes, okay? First, there generally tends to be multiple and many short dysfunctional, relationships. This generally stems from a poor sense of self, like we had discussed earlier. Eric Erickson's The Self-Actualization, Intimacy versus Isolation, Stage 6. Basically this is a refusal to go deeper into a committed relationship, or to expose yourself emotionally. These men tend to be distant, untrusting, of females, that sort of thing. These tumultuous relationships tend to be what's considered the hallmark for emotionally unavailable men. With that, we also need to consider, the fact that, past psychological conditions and past psychological traumas definitely contribute to aiding these men to become emotionally unavailable. Sometimes, as I was stating, they choose not to dwell deeper because of the poor self-image that they have of themselves. And another reason too is if they don't want to go deeper, they tend to leave what I call the the romantic door open, for several possibilities. Because the door is always changing, it's always opening. Not going to really get into that, but anyhow. So basically they have a few different, things that kind of fester in their mind. They definitely have a fear of relationships turning sour. So, basically in turn, they really avoid any kind of, committed relationship or anything like that because it's just easier. Be done with it. Okay. So basically in his mind, emotional involvement can really make an emotionally uninvolved man who avoids emotional involvement, really, it does two things to him. The first is that it emasculates him. It, affects his masculinity, makes him feel, less of a man, that sort of thing. And the second one is that the emotions tend to overwhelm him, and that's a big thing, especially for men that are unavailable emotionally. And because of this mentally, it limits the gentleman's capacity to ever become emotionally involved on any level. And, it is kind of sad, but we must also remember too that, even though the gentlemen, they don't want to, become so deep, and talk about, feelings and that sort of thing, they still desire the company and affection of females to more or less satiate their, sexual kind of, desire. The affections of women, they always maybe are surrounded by women, or, tons of, social media, women friends, things like that. Basically, the main tip that I can give someone who is trying to date an emotionally unavailable man, is to basically get to the root of the problem. Okay. And once you do that, you need to understand how it affects him. Okay. And with this, I'm going to kind of jump right in and more or less start with defense mechanisms. Basically events in his life have caused this behavior, caused him to resist, commitment, that sort of thing. He could be very vague or kind of evasive in his answers, and sometimes he's arrogant, sometimes he's MIA. Always sucks, I know. But basically all of these symptoms are, they're a result of some type of psychological influence in his life. This type of behavior, it is considered a defense mechanism, but it's also, as we discussed earlier, an emotional wall or a barrier to override, emotion with thought. The next thing that kind of affects the gentleman in that sense is poor role models. And by this, I mean, more or less with family, and I'm more or less, referring to the father. A father is, a big impact on his son's life, especially if he's emotionally inept or emotionally unavailable. It tends to make their romantic future anything but bright, and it's very, very sad. And this is not to be confused with an emotionally withholding mother or an unloving mother. Basically, it's poor communication skills that he's witnessed by his father. And at some point he's going to foster this destructive behavior, and the cycle in turn will continue. And with this being said, the way that the father has become emotionally unavailable will definitely aid his son into adulthood staying emotionally unavailable. So this definitely stems from childhood. We're not placing 100% of the blame here on the father, but, the father has not shown or demonstrated to the son the healthy ways to relate to people. Perhaps in the home they were not open with feelings, or, emotions were never encouraged, to be talked about, or sometimes, emotions were conveyed as shameful or weak. And, I can't stress this enough, that this basically leads to serious long-term emotional issues for the child. Children unconsciously learn, behaviors, from their parents, their caregivers, adults. The next thing I want to get into here is the negative response to emotions. A lot of times emotions are seen as, wussy, or, oh, you're going to talk about, oh, you love so-and-so, or you're sad, it's, oh, wuss thing, boys don't talk like that. But basically, during your child development years, your negative response to emotions, a lot of times with these emotionally inept fathers, but, any caregiver in general, is unwanted repercussions. For example, this would be like a parent or parent's father, especially punishing the child, for, wanting to open up, or, convey emotions, and just kind of, maybe tell them how they feel. So the mentality behind this is the child, then the son, he associates with opening up with his feelings. It results in negative, unwanted repercussions or consequences. Therefore, the child then associates emotions with being bad. Okay. And that's no way to live. All right. Well, later in life, this gentleman tends to develop a negative approach to relationships. So they tend to have horrible dating history. An example for this, it's actually pretty traumatic, would actually be a gentleman who maybe, is deeply, emotionally involved with the girl. Perhaps he even loves her. So when he, opens up and tells her how he feels, she doesn't feel the same way, so he feels rejected, therefore he shuts down. Okay, and with this, the cycle ensues. So it's kind of the same thing, with the next relationship. Rejection to men, they fear this. So a lot of times the emotionally unavailable man will become distant or aloof, and the mentality behind this is, in order for them not to be hurt or rejected or denied, so on and so forth, they are going to invest the minimal amount of emotional involvement to this relationship. Like, why invest something if I'm going to be hurt, or, I have to go through this again? It's mentality, but it is quite sad. I mean, and this, it just, to them, it limits the chances of being hurt from this to almost none. Okay, so that's kind of a safe road for them. The next thing I want to talk about is socialization, reasonable socialization. Men are generally taught to be, powerful and strong and domineering and, that sort of thing. Basically, fathers, kind of always have that thing with, their sons, like, oh, boys don't cry. That's something for girls, don't get upset, that sort of thing. So with this being drilled inside the gentleman's mind, oftentimes when he more or less, feels like maybe he's starting to emotionally kind of get a little closer to someone, like, light bulb. Oh my God, I like her. Oh my God, So, in turn, basically what the emotionally unavailable men will do is they will either ghost the girl, which is where he just up and disappeared like Casper, or, they will break up with her rather than to experience feelings, emotions, or love for her. It's just easier. Bye, that's horrible. Okay. The next thing in association with this is a poor entourage, maybe like a group of players or your friends, that sort of thing. Guys that just treat women like shit and dispensable, and this is more or less, the guys who treat women, just like they're bitches. I didn't want to say that, but bitches and hoes kind of thing. So improper social habitats, that could also be incarceration, very long prison terms, that sort of thing. Maybe gang affiliations. I mean, the list goes on and on. Next thing I want to jump into here is traumatic experiences. Trauma affects your psyche and your mentality, your perception of the world, of everything around you. So traumatic events hinder the gentleman from identifying his fears and overcoming them. Okay. And with that being said, with him not wanting to do that and open up, it hinders him to not be there for you in a relationship emotionally. Really, or any aspect for that matter. Once again, as I said, the cycle ensues. The father's, negative, emotional responses, triggers, becomes, the child becomes his father, and a lot of times, there is no growth when you can't establish your fears and, kind of overcome them. Therefore, they are always going to be emotionally, unavailable to women. A couple other things here, a couple other traits. It's very high chance that this type of man is very self-critical. Okay. And with that, he is unable to connect emotionally with others. The saddest thing I think in the world is the fact that he does not allow you to connect with him. Okay. And this is probably why they don't disclose, much about their life or, what's going on in their life, that sort of thing. An emotionally unavailable men, they have to be in tune with their emotions first, before they can ever share theirs with any woman. Okay. And these men, they don't share their feelings, number one. And number two, if you share feelings with them, they have absolutely no value to these men. So basically, you're sharing it for nothing. It's a barrier, it's a wall that's put up. They will never fully be a part of a relationship. They will never be 100% there. So basically what we need to do is we need to learn how to identify these feelings these men do. Talk to their interest, romantic interest about it, and this is difficult because of the influence between the unloving mother and, the emotionally, unavailable father. So basically, he's always going into an internal battle with what others think about him, although he will never explicitly say or show that. If he values male perception more than he does females' perception, he will in turn tend to treat females poorly in a male-dominated environment, such as workplace, hanging out, club, so on and so forth. But basically, it's a tough guy role. They tend to shut down emotionally. Like I said earlier, this is a defense mechanism, and this applies to men in committed relationships. They act vague, evasive, ambiguous. They had trouble addressing, problems in relationships or with themselves, so they shut down. More often than not, these men cannot feel, okay? They cannot feel love. They cannot feel romance. They can't feel lust to satisfy and satiate, their sexual needs. But at times they feel sad or depressed, but they can't cry. They have no release for that. Rarely do they ever suffer guilt. And if they do, they probably bury it with anger. The mentality here is the failure to understand emotions ultimately leads to the failure to understand women, okay? Emotionally unavailable men cannot grasp that relationships are two ways, okay? So there's no real potential room for growth in that type of relationship. So therefore, he stops the relationship and himself from, pursuing on and growing in a healthy way. It's very, very difficult to engage in emotional situations for these men. Relationships require a lot of energy. They require, compromise. And this type of guy has no clue what he wants in a female. None. Just completely clueless. Basically, I'm going to wrap this up, though, with a final thought. These type of men, you can either accept them as they are or leave them be. Okay? They're very difficult to pin down. Emotionally unavailable men, they're evasive about the status of the relationship. And because they can't feel, they will never tell you, I love you. They will never tell you, nor will they ever mean it because they don't know how. So, but anyway, as always, thank you guys for joining the discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up and join me later for another discussion. Bye.